Okay, so today what I'm going to talk about is high and low knocking points and how to find out where to put your knocking point. I did a small section of this in my bow building video on my PSC Super Focus XL. However, I ended up being wrong, and from the information I learned from doing that, I'm going to share with you here. So simply what a knocking point is, I'm going to show you here, is where your knock from your arrow sits on your bow. So it's just right in there. So your arrow sits in there and you pull back the bow with your release aid on your D. So how I set it up initially in my bow build video was pretty much I put my rest on and I got it straight, and then I used a bow square. So from there what I did is when I put my bow square on, I just made sure that the end of the bow square lightly rubbed off the top of my rest, and then that's how I found where my knocking point was. So how do you know if your knocking point is actually correct? Now, realistically, you can almost pick anywhere. Obviously you're not going to tie it like down there, but So what I did at the start is I pretty much picked the most central part from where my bow square told me to serve. But then I realized it was a little bit high. How do you check if your knocking point is too high or too low? Let me just say before continuing, when you change your knocking point, you're pretty much going to change the tune of your bow. So if you served on your knocking point and you watch this video and you realize that your knocking point is in the wrong place, you go and change it, you may need to bare shaft tune again or paper tune again, whichever it is that you do. So how you check, right? You draw up your bow, you come back and you get to the back wall, okay? And you're gonna need a target. And you come into anchor and you aim, and you start aiming in the 10. And then what you do is you pull really hard on your back wall, just trying to keep this bow arm as straight as possible while keeping the pin in the 10 ring. And when you push really hard, what happens is, one of two things can happen. One, your pin can naturally float up, or your pin can naturally float down when you pull really hard on the stops. So what happened in my case was, I pulled really hard and the pin went up on the target, right? So what you need to do then, to counter that, is to bring your knocking point down. So from where I served it in my video, I brought it down 8 millimeters, and it made a world of a difference. So I know it's going to be hard to put in perspective, but I pretty much had my knocking point kind of where the top of the D-loop is there now. The lower your knocking point is, the more pressure you can get on the heel of your hand. Some people like that, some people don't. I certainly do anyway. I would encourage you to try if you haven't already. Then vice versa of that, if you get back and pull really hard on the stops and your pin goes down, then you need to move your knocking point up. Usually, it doesn't really happen that your knocking point is too low. It could happen, but usually not. It'll usually be a little bit high, and then you need to bring it down just a little bit. With every single bow, it is a little bit different. So my 8 millimeters that I was talking about, how much I brought it down by, isn't going to be the same on your Hoyt or your Prime or your Matthews. So there is going to be a lot of trial and error with, serving a new knocking point and then pushing really hard on the stops and seeing where the pin goes. You will need to allow for the fact that, none of us are machines. There is going to be, human input that, like, when I pull back on the stops and I push really hard, sometimes, I'll like, my arm will just dip back down. But I know that's just because of me. It's just because human error. So you need to make sure that when you pull back and you pull back hard in the stops, that you're just trying to keep this arm as still as possible. So as I said, if you get back to the wall and don't really push that hard, I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you don't push hard on the wall and you do this, it's going to change the tune of your bow for not really any reason if you're not pulling hard on your back wall. So if you're not pulling hard on your back wall, I'd say maybe leave it for now. Maybe think about it. Maybe pull hard on your back wall just to see what happens. I don't pull extremely hard into my back wall. I do pull hard into it, but not really hard. Because sometimes when if I feel like I'm drawn back and I'm hitting the wall and then I'm kind of relaxing, then sometimes I can feel like I can jerk out of the back wall, and then I have to bring myself back into it. So I feel like if I just go that bit much more, even if I do relax a little bit, I'm not going to fall out of the back wall. So that's why this was important for me to tune. So it's just something for you guys to think about. Maybe try it, see if you like it. If you don't, what I always do is I have this silver pen and I mark where my original 2 knocking points were, so that if I do this and I don't like it at all, I can just take it all off and then serve it like back to exactly where my original knocking point was. If you don't have a silver pen, you can measure it. That would work too.